We in Ukraine understand. You guys in the United States, Canada, England, Europe, you are tired. Oh no, that war again. Those atrocities of the Russian army on the annexed Ukrainian territories, those power cuts in Ukrainian cities in the middle of the winter. Not again. What exactly does it have to do with us? Why do we have to send our tax money over there, making our costs over here skyrocket? Can those Russians and Ukrainians finally get along? Somehow? No, we can't. Anyhow. Good afternoon, this is Henry Keane and the Daily Wrap-Up Show on Freedom TV channel. We in Ukraine can't get along with Russians not only because, as if that is not a sufficient reason itself, they've come to Ukraine to kill us. Not only because they're driven by a venomous mixture of a propagandistic xenophobic frenzy and maniacal outdated Soviet-era imperialistic arrogance. Not only they have come to Ukraine to obliterate our way of life and every single thing that is Ukrainian. Not only because their Tsar craves to dominate by the ugly and just force of an unprovoked, invasive warfare. Yet, no matter how valid the above-mentioned reasons might be, those are not really reasons. Those are the consequences. The reason is just one. Our mentalities differ drastically. Let me take a minute of your precious time and explain how. Let us have a look at the Russians leaving the annexed territories. Obliterated houses, mass graves, death, destruction, oppression, and hatred. In Kharkiv, I have witnessed the Russian Soviet-era missile destroying a Soviet-era building with all these Soviet symbols on it. And I suddenly got that feeling that only grew stronger with time that, like the ancient mythological snake Ouroboros, the one that is biting its own tail, in the face of Putin's Russia, the world nowadays is witnessing the agony and demise of the Soviet Empire. If not of hurt pride, why, otherwise, Russians have to liberate Ukraine that way? Throw thousands of them Russian troops into meat grinder in a desperate attempt to regain control territories that have zero tactical value? Why to use the still annexed territories as a resource base and a ground zero for continuing the aggression and treat the locals as hostages? Why is it that the military tactics of Ukrainian and Russian armies are strikingly different? While Russian occupiers destroy everything at sight with massive and ruthless carpet shelling, while Ukrainian army carry out as highly precise strikes on military targets alone as possible, treating the land as their native land and the people as their native people. Why is it, when the Ukrainian army gains back the control of occupied territories, locals meet them with tears of joy in their eyes? Why is it that the International Criminal Court keeps finding mass graves full of corpses of liberated Ukrainians, men, women, children, after Russians leave? If not in desperate need to force Zelensky to negotiate, the Russian army can have a chance to regroup and get the resources. Why is it that the Russian command is shelling civilian infrastructure in Kiev, Sumy, Kupiansk, Kherson, and all of Ukraine? We understand you in the West are tired of this war. However, answer just one of the above questions, and you will inevitably understand us, the Ukraine. That is why we call the Russians occupants, murderers, and war criminals. That is why, while they crave for revenge, we crave for justice. That is why we can't and won't stop until we drive Russians back to where they belong, to Russia. And that is why you should, wherever you are, close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself in a winter Kiev, where we do our best not only to survive for the sake of ourselves, but to win for the sake of the whole civilized world. And while you, unfortunately, are paying extra money for power, we have none. for days, weeks, and sometimes even months. And while you are paying extra for that petrol, we pay the toll by the death of our soldiers and civilians. And while you are tired of our high living costs and news from Ukraine that annoy you, please try to understand this. As reported by the Office of the Attorney General, since the beginning of the Russian invasion, 343 children have died and more than 600 were injured. 1,000 of childhoods ruined. And the office clarifies. These figures are not final. Unfortunately, so many of the political decisions in this world get made out of pride and not out of a real sense of doing what's right for your country. Political common sense is even less common than a usual everyday one and is more like a superpower these days. The world is helping Ukraine by spending billions of dollars this war. Is that the case? Where does the money go? Does it help? And are Ukrainians really winning? Meet Chuck Holton, war correspondent, author, UATV producer.
Chuck Holton. Who is he? How he ended up here in Ukraine, being a war correspondent, journalist?
I've been a war correspondent for about 20 years. Started in 2003, right at the beginning of the Iraq War. And I've been covering wars and disasters ever since. It's kind of become my specialty. I spent 8 years in the U.S. military in the special operations community.
You're also a TV producer, right? You are an author?
I am, yeah. I've got 10 books in print.
So this is your story, and your story from Donbass. What exactly are you trying to convey? What exactly are you trying to portray? What exactly you want to tell your audience with these stories?
You know, some people come to the war zone to make a name for themselves. I don't feel like I need to do that anymore. This is not, right now, a career-making place to be for a journalist, because, especially an American journalist, because a lot of people in America, they've moved on from Ukraine. They don't want to hear about Ukraine anymore. But there are people hurting here. I'm telling the story of the people who are really having their worst day. But I can tell the world about this situation, and then the world can do something about it. And as far as I'm concerned, all of my career has been preparation for this, because this is the first actual land war, conventional warfare that I've ever covered, because everything else that we've ever covered in our lifetimes has been an insurgency. All you have to do is go out to the villages around the places that are recently liberated and talk to some old invalid woman who, I'm afraid the next time I knock on her door, I'll find a frozen corpse in there. And feel like by telling her story, I can actually save her life.
So you're actually reminding the world what is going on right now, not letting it forget.
Exactly.
100 years ago, Europe was dragged into two wars, actually, the first and the second one. A very infantile and very lazy Europe, wealthy Europe. Don't you feel something like that is happening right now? Is the history is a little bit repeating itself right now, and the lesson has not been really learned? Do you think that is the case?
I think there are some significant differences, but I think there are also some significant similarities. But from a political standpoint, I try not to get too wrapped up in the politics of it, simply because I think that you do that to the detriment of the people who are hurting on the ground. But from the standpoint of those people, it's no different than their ancestors faced in World War II or World War I or the Holodomor or many of the other crises that they've been through in Europe.
Collective West is giving enough weaponry to Ukraine. Do you think this is the case? Do you think it's enough?
I understand why the West has wanted to give weaponry to Ukraine, and I think that Ukraine has made very, very good use of it. I think it is incumbent on the leader of Ukraine to ask for everything he can possibly get. And so if you ask him, do you have enough? He'll, of course, say no. But if you ask people in the United States, should they keep sending their tax dollars over here, they're now starting to go, gosh, that's a lot of money. And it's really not. So the United States usually spends about $880 billion a year on its military. So far, we've sent about 5% of that to Ukraine this year. What do we get for that money? Well, if you went to the generals 2 years ago in the United States and you said, for a mere $17 billion, we will give you a laboratory in which you can test in real combat conditions American weaponry against Soviet bloc weaponry and find out which one is better, they would have written that check all day long. They would have been so glad to do that. And by the way, you don't have to lose any U.S. troops to do it. And we may, in fact, do away with one of our greatest adversaries and make them not be a threat for the next generation, right? That's a great return on investment. I've always been of the mind that it's a really dangerous idea to give weapons to any other country. I've always said, up until this war, fight it ourselves, because weapons are durable and fungible, and someday they will be shooting back at us, almost guaranteed.
If now you changed your mind.
Well, so I've changed my mind in that I think the most valuable thing that the United States has given to Ukraine has nothing to do with the weaponry. It's the intelligence that we've given them, because we have such a strong and well-developed signals intelligence capability. Most people don't know about that, but we've been able to pass information along to Ukraine that allows Ukraine to know exactly where to bomb. So with one artillery round, they can kill a Russian general, and they've killed dozens of them, whereas the Russians don't have that capability in reverse. And we have much of the money that we have promised to Ukraine is not actually going to Ukraine. It's going to our partners in NATO to encourage them to switch from Soviet-era weaponry to American weaponry. That's good for America, and it's also good for NATO. So Lithuania, Estonia, many of those countries, Poland, that had a lot of old Soviet-era weaponry, hey, let's get rid of that by giving it to Ukraine, and we'll give you loan guarantees in order for you to buy new F-16s and new weapons from the United States. That's good for the U.S. defense industry.
How is that helping Ukraine exactly right now?
It's not helping Ukraine right now. $9 billion of the money that was slated in those packages for Ukraine is actually going to the U.S. Pentagon to replace about $3 billion of weaponry that they gave to Ukraine, old stuff that we weren't using anymore. So it's like, you can replace your old toys with better toys and give your old toys to Ukraine, and they can make use of those. But also, $4 billion of the money that we've slated for Ukraine goes to pay for U.S. troops in Poland. That does nothing at all for Ukraine. That's only for NATO. Much of the money, $21 billion of the $40 billion, the initial $40 billion package, is slated to help Ukraine in future years, assuming that they survive that long, all the way out to 2037. So that doesn't help Ukraine at all right now. It's just a guarantee of future help. So I think Americans need to understand that, and that's one thing that they don't understand very well.
How do you, as a soldier and an expert, assess the quality of the Ukrainian Army Commandment in Donbass and the south of the country?
Let me preface my answer by saying I think the United States military is very, very well-trained and experienced in insurgency warfare. And they've done that to the detriment of training in conventional warfare. If the United States ever, God forbid, got involved in this conflict directly, there would be a big learning curve, and we would lose a lot of soldiers because we are not prepared. Right now, the Ukrainian troops that have been out in the field for months are far better trained in conventional warfare than American troops are. The Ukrainian leadership has taken an ad hoc force thrown together in days, weeks, right? And they have integrated them into an amazing fighting force. Some of the things that I've seen on the front lines are mind-boggling to an American. Like, meet this guy who was a CEO of some kind of tech company, and he had a lot of money, so he raised and trained his own and equipped his own company of soldiers, and then integrated them into the Ukrainian military and went out and fought the Russians, and is doing amazing things. Now, that would never happen in the United States. The fact that Ukrainians are raising money for their own soldiers to equip them with body armor and night vision and socks and things like that. Mind-boggling for an American. And yet the Ukrainians have taken, Ukrainian leadership has taken that force that's, made up of bankers and lawyers and plumbers and guys who are farmers, and has molded them into a fighting force that is absolutely wearing out the Russians. I mean, they're not just almost winning, they are taking it to the Russians so badly right now. It almost makes you feel bad for the Russians, I mean, all they have to do is leave and it'll be over, right? But they're getting their heads handed to them on the battlefield every time they try to go up against the Ukrainian army, and you've got to hand it to the Ukrainians for that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holton, for your interview and for your time.
Okay.
It was Chuck Holton, not an ordinary person. At age 17, Holton joined the United States Army. He is a graduate of both Airborne School and Ranger School. Holton went on to attend Jump Master School, Nuclear, Biological and Chemical Warfare School, and Assault Climber School too, and was later an instructor at the United States Military Academy. After 4 years of active duty, Holton joined the Wisconsin Army National Guard, where he received training as a helicopter mechanic and eventually became trained as an Air Scout observer. His awards and decorations include the Army Service Ribbon, Good Conduct Medal, National Defense Service Medal, Army Commendation Medal, Senior Parachutist Badge, Ranger Tab, Expert Infantryman Badge, and Combat Infantryman Badge. So I think this is the man who knows something about war. Yesterday, Chuck left for Zaporizhia, and then to Bakhmut, to the very front line, to cover the war for you. So it will be easier for you to understand why it is so important for all of us not to pass this warfare or to stop it for a while for the sake of any reasons, but to win for the sake of the whole free world. It was Henry Keane, a daily wrap-up show on Freedom TV channel.